Hey guys, today we are talking about two major presidents all at once, so buckle up, we've got a lot to cover. But today we're talking about Eisenhower and JFK and their administrations and what, at least for Eisenhower and then for JFK, the domestic policies and stuff looked like and how they actually came to be president. So the objective question for today, what policy did Eisenhower and JFK use to deal with communism? Cool. So have you ever ridden or driven on a highway? Hopefully the answer is yes. If you have Eisenhower to thank for that. And his administration pushes through a highway act that helps build thousands and thousands of miles of highway all over the country. So we'll get to that. Now, remember that this is Cold War time, right? The previous president, Harry Truman, was using a policy called containment. And containment was all about not fighting communism where it already exists, but instead making sure that it only stays where it exists and it doesn't spread to anywhere else. And this directly aligns with the domino theory, the idea that if one country falls to communism, then another will fall and another will fall. And soon enough, there will be tons and tons of communist countries, and the free, kind of ideas that we align with are going to be outnumbered. Remember that, kind of a little bit of an overview of the Cold War just to refresh our memories, right? We have NATO on one side, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's us, and a majority of the Western European nations. And then we also have the Warsaw Pact, which of course is the Soviet Union, led by Stalin initially, at this point, and then also the Eastern European nation. So what we're trying to do as our nation, led by Harry Truman, using containment, is to make sure that we're not fighting communism where it exists, but we're making sure it doesn't spread. And we do this through the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, giving millions and millions, billions actually, dollars to nations who are fighting communism. Now we're shifting, however, because the next two presidents we're going to look at, Eisenhower and JFK, use a different policy. Eisenhower and JFK use a policy called brinkmanship. And if you've ever heard the phrase, wow, I'm at the brink of exhaustion, or we're at the brink of war, that means we're at the very, very edge, and one little tiny thing could push us over. So it's basically like a game of chicken that we're going to play with the Soviet Union. Both Eisenhower and Kennedy are going to refuse to back down and are going to kind of basically square up. And we're looking at the Soviets, and the Soviets are looking at us, and we're waiting for one of us to blink first. All right, so it's kind of a more intense form. Containment was kind of passive. Brinkmanship is kind of challenging. It's basically daring the other person to do something. Now, the election of 1952 rolls around. Remember that Eisenhower returns after World War II is over as a hero. He, like a lot of the presidents we're about to talk about in the next week or so, are veterans. Eisenhower, remember, was the supreme Allied commander of all Allied troops in the European theater. He led D-Day. He's very, very famous. He's very, very popular. However, up until this point, Eisenhower has not identified with a political party. Absolutely no one knows where his head is at. He's never talked politics. His parents were pacifists, so nobody knows where he really allies with. And in fact, Harry Truman says, hey, if you want to run as, the Democratic nominee, I'll endorse you. And Eisenhower kind of pitter-patters around, and eventually in 1952 he decides it's his time. So he decides to run as a Republican. He selects a man named Richard Nixon to run as his vice president, and this is the election of 1952. Eisenhower easily wins. He wins 57% of the popular vote, and this is also important because for the first time in 20 years, 2 decades, the Democrats are out of the office. That means that for the first time in 2 decades, there's a Republican in the White House instead of a Democrat. Remember that FDR was president for so long, right? He won 4 elections. He was there for forever. Harry Truman as well, right? Served for quite a while as well. So for the first time in 2 decades, we've got a Republican in the White House. Eisenhower, and we're going to kind of fly through this, dynamic conservatism. One of the reasons Eisenhower is such an interesting president, and in my mind kind of underrated, is he's a perfect blend. He has some ideas that are very, very Republican, and he also has some ideas that are very, very Democrat. And because he never, picked a side early on, he's comfortable with kind of sitting in between and saying, hey, listen, in some regards I think this way, and in some regards I think this way, which is why his administration really helped the country kind of recover. So financially, fiscally, we're going to be very conservative. We're going to save our money. We're going to well, I'll stop there. We're fiscally conservative, okay? But we're also socially very liberal under Eisenhower. So a lot of the New Deal things that that the country was sure that a Republican would immediately tear down, he kept. So an example of this is Social Security, something that the Democrats especially were really scared would be scrapped by a Republican. He keeps in place. All right, so a very balanced domestic program. Also, the interstate highway, as I already prefaced. This is going to be the largest public works project so far. So beating even some of those, or all of the New Deal projects that FDR did to kind of put people back to work. This is going to be even larger than that. 42,000 miles of highway are going to be constructed in the United States. Now, why? This is because Eisenhower has not super recently, but kind of recently, was in Europe, right, fighting World War II, and he saw how well planned out some of their cities were, and how important it is to have thoroughfares that lead from, major city to major city, and also how to plan things out. So he was very, very impressed with the highways and stuff that he saw in Europe. And America at this point, even as, one of the only, superpowers left, doesn't have anything like that. Also, he knows that it's very important for Americans to be able to get out of a certain place very quickly because of this impending nuclear war, right? The Cold War, we're living in constant fear that at any moment the Soviets could drop a bomb on us. So what Eisenhower knows we need is a quick way for a lot of Americans to evacuate. Some of you have seen those hurricane evacuation routes, they're signs that tell you which highways to take if a hurricane's coming. It's like that, only for nuclear warheads. So a really kind of forward-thinking idea there. Also, the civil rights movement begins. We're not going to talk much about this right now because we're going to talk about the civil rights in a lot of detail next week. But just know that that's going underneath Eisenhower as well. Here's the highway systems. Cool. Foreign policy, remember that he doesn't like containment, so he's going to institute brinkmanship. It's bringing the country to the brink of war. It's saying, hey, listen, we have the bomb and we're not afraid to use it. However, this leads to the concept of mutually assured destruction, otherwise referred to as MAD. The idea that if we launch a bomb on the Soviets will launch a bomb on us, and then we'll retaliate, and so will they, and eventually the whole world will be, smoking. So that's, of course, a fear. And underneath Eisenhower, the Soviets launch Sputnik. All right, they launch a satellite into outer space, and this freaks the Americans out because we thought we had the upper hand. We got the atomic bomb first, so we think we're all prestigious and, really advanced, and the Soviets are trying to catch up, and all of a sudden they're getting to space before us. So we start to freak out, and a lot of manpower and finance is going to go towards, the budding space program. Also going on, Stalin's going to die. Another guy named Khrushchev is going to take over the Soviet Union, so just know that. All right. Eisenhower's presidency comes to an end. He serves 2 terms, and now we need to elect a new president. There's a guy running for office, and his name is John Kennedy, JFK, a very wealthy man from a very wealthy family. He fought in World War II as well. Not only fought, but he was a freaking man-dime in World War II. If we were in class, I would go on like a 15-minute tangent about all the awesome stuff he did in World War II. His ship was sunk. He ended up, linking together a bunch of his guys. He towed them to an island. He carved messages into coconuts to ask for help. It was crazy. He was awesome. So anyway, awesome World War II hero. He returns, and he's very soon after elected to the U.S. Senate as a Democrat, okay? So he's a senator. He wants to run as the Democrat. On the other hand, we have a man named Richard Nixon. He was, remember, Eisenhower's vice president. Eisenhower says, hey, do you want me to endorse you? I will. And Nixon says, no, I want to win on my own. He's from California. He loses this, spoiler alert, he loses this election because of the first televised debate. If you have access to this PowerPoint, that video link right there is an awesome video that kind of explains how that televised debate went and why it cost Richard Nixon. To sum it up real quick, JFK looked tan, young, informed. On the other hand, Richard Nixon, who was in the hospital for a long time for a knee injury, and he just recovered from the flu, looked pale, creepy, kind of corpse-like. He was fidgety. He refused to wear any makeup, so he looked, deadish, and it just, everyone who saw it said, oh yeah, heck yeah, I'm voting for the tan guy, not the corpse, right? So anyway, election of 1960 results, here we go. JFK beats Richard Nixon. JFK is also really cool for a couple of different reasons. He's the one and only president to ever win the Pulitzer Prize. He's the one and only president to win the Navy and Marine Corps Medal from World War II. He's the one and only president to win a Purple Heart, and he's the one and only president to be a Catholic. So a lot of cool claims to fame that JFK has. Also, he's the youngest president to ever be elected. He's not the youngest person to be president. That was Teddy Roosevelt when McKinley was assassinated. But he is the youngest president to be elected at his time at the age of 43. So cool. His inaugural address, one of his most famous quotes, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So very famous JFK quote you've probably heard before. You should just know that's JFK. All right, in terms of policy, he introduces the concept of a new frontier, the idea that America is arriving at a new time, at a place that's new to us. There's new concepts going on. There's the space frontier that we need to discover. There's America kind of coming of age. There's us recovering from the war and also kind of confronting some of these civil rights issues, right? There's a lot of change occurring, and he says he's ready to help America through that. He's also going to utilize brinkmanship. However, he has a little remix on it, so it is brinkmanship, but he also adds the policy of flexible response. And what this allows JFK to do is still utilize brinkmanship, still bring the country to the brink of war, but he allows himself some flexibility when deciding what to do. So whereas something that may have happened may have caused Eisenhower to say, okay, that's it, we're going, JFK has the ability to say, let's see what I can do with this, right? So that'll come into play more when we talk about his foreign policy tomorrow. As far as domestic affairs under JFK, we've got the space race going on. JFK promises Americans that by the end of the decade, they will get to the moon. So in 1962, he promises Americans, by the end of this decade, we will get to the moon. And he's right. Just barely, right? 1969, America ends up landing on the moon, the first person to get to the moon. Now, were we the first person to get an animal into space? No, that was the Soviets. Were we the first person to get a man into space? No, that was the Soviets. Were we the first person to put a woman into space? No, that was the Soviets. But were we the first person to get a person on the moon? Yes, and for us, that's what matters. The Soviets beat us in every other thing, but we got to the moon first, so boom. Roasted. America wins the space race. Also, civil rights. Civil rights are going to become more of an issue. They're going to gain a lot of momentum underneath JFK. Eventually, the Civil Rights Act is going to be passed in 1964. JFK is instrumental in getting that passed. Unfortunately, he won't be around to see it. More on that tomorrow. And then also women's rights. The Equal Pay Act is going to be passed in 1963. We're going to make it illegal to discriminate based on someone's gender. Does it still happen? Yes. Is it illegal? Yes. So a lot of change underneath JFK going on here. Tomorrow we're going to talk about JFK's foreign policies, and there's a lot of events that happen underneath JFK, but I thought this was the best way to kind of divvy it up. If we were still in class, we would talk about each one of these presidents as entire class periods. We would have spent an entire day on Eisenhower at least, but unfortunately we're kind of ending the near this semester, and we got to kind of squish things together just a little bit. All right, well, make sure to answer your objective question. That's all I have for you today. See you later. Bye-bye.